Make lying wrong. Make lying wrong. You want to unmute?
Oh, hi. Um,
Hey,
hey, thanks, Jay. Can you hear me okay?
yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'm not well trained in philosophy, so please go easy on me. But my question was, are from your perspective, is religion or Christianity or whatever your faith is it something that can be purely arrived at based on evidence and reason, or do you think that it requires an act of faith?
I would say that we're not fideists. So what you're describing is called fideism, the idea that you just sort of make this leap, and maybe there's some things that suggest God's existence, or maybe the Bible might be inspired, but you just got to make that leap. That's typically a post-Protestant, post-Enlightenment idea. Again, it's called fideism. And neither the Roman Catholic Church nor the history of the Orthodox Church supports fideism. It's more so something that you see in Protestant evangelical circles. So we believe that reasoning is a faculty that does point towards the existence of God. Evidential arguments definitely point towards the existence of God, but I don't set a divide between reasoning and faith. The transcendental argument actually argues that you could not even have the possibility of reason or reasoning if God didn't exist. So it's a much stronger claim.
And do you think that other people who use faith properly always get the right answer, or is it possible for lots of different religions and sects of religion to be attempting to use faith and to arrive at different conclusions?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean when you say using faith to arrive at conclusions. I mean, like, for example, for us, sometimes the word faith refers to an act that an individual does in terms of like what we say in the Greek word is pistis, that is to believe and to have sort of certitude about a position. Sometimes, quote, faith refers to the entire body of beliefs of a religion, such as divine revelation or the Nicene Creed or something like that. So, kind of really just depends on what you mean by the word faith there. But I think we would say that we determine knowledge in different ways because different things are known in different ways. And for example, God is known not just through reason, but through his own self-disclosure or what we call divine revelation. So scripture and the tradition of the church are, quote, divine revelation. That for us is the faith. And then when a person believes that, they're exercising their faith. But I conceive of it more in a philosophical sense as a paradigm, and I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand, like, in a scientific disagreement, you can oftentimes pinpoint the source of the disagreement and what would be required to persuade the other person. Like, if an ancient person believed that, you know, a fertilized human was like a tiny human and then grew up, we can say, ah, well, they didn't have microscopes, they didn't have modern embryology, and you could show them an ultrasound and so on and say, see, it's not a tiny human, it's actually a fetus and so on. With religion, my question is, how do you pinpoint the difference? Like if someone has a revelation from God and they believe in something based on faith, maybe supported by reason and evidence, but certainly driven by faith.
Yeah, but again, what you're calling faith there is something that is assuming the dichotomy that I was talking about earlier, where I don't actually believe that there's a dichotomy between, quote, believing something on faith versus believing something on the basis of evidence and reason, because I believe that evidence and reasoning are themselves things that presuppose God's existence. So I have it the other way around. I believe that everybody has faith commitments, including atheists and scientists. They just don't admit that. And when you really drill into it, when you talk about belief in the scientific method, the rationality, logicality, and meaning behind the scientific method, none of those things are proven or known by the scientific method. They're actually just assumed, and then I can further flesh that out by getting into things like the categories of knowledge or the preconditions of knowledge. None of those things are known or proven by the scientific method or empirical sense data. So thus, those would all be, quote, faiths or faith beliefs or faith propositions according to the way that you're fleshing it out. So I don't actually see that big of a difference between a skeptical atheist and a Christian believer.
So do you think that there's not a distinction between like a scientific evidence-based approach to understanding a problem versus prayer or revelation or looking at a holy scripture? It's all a form of reason?
I just think it's more nuanced than that. That the faculty of reasoning is used in both. Revelation, divine revelation, is a different type of thing than the type of knowledge or the information that you gain from sense data. I definitely believe that people use the scientific method to study and master the natural world. You couldn't have engineering or science without it. But I don't think that it's equated to divine revelation. But I think that the two categories necessitate and interrelate with one another because we're bodily beings. We have five senses. We have, you know, spatial location that we move around in. And God made us that way, but He also made us to not just be beings that operate on sense data, but also on higher faculties.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is, and sorry, you can move on to the next speaker if I'm trespassing on
No, these are great
the,
questions.
the from my perspective, and you can maybe you disagree with this, there is a critical difference between someone who's using the scientific method to arrive at conclusions. Like if we do a controlled study about whether or not palm reading works, that's different from someone who says, I just anecdotally see that it works and I'm convinced, right? Those are two different things. Or if someone says, I'm going to look at drug trials and see if this one cures cancer or not, and another person says, I'm just going to pray, those are definitely two different ways of coming to conclusions. And I feel like what I'm asking is, if you use the non-scientific way, why do they lead to different conclusions?
I understand what you're saying, but you're missing the point that I'm making about what I mean when I say divine revelation or faith. For example, when I talked about the scientific method itself, I'm saying on a higher level that uh, it's a raising the bar, so to speak, or I'm asking a more fundamental question that for you to do science presupposes things that are not under the purview of science, like logic, for example. And science doesn't and can't prove logic empirically. So science is a faith-based enterprise. The only difference is that you have a faith in a finite temporal enterprise. And my faith is actually something that would ground the very possibility of you doing science. Do you see the difference in those claims? I'm making a paradigm level claim.
I think so. I'm going back to the comment you made earlier about the Mormon who you said you could pinpoint where Joseph Smith, inserted some text. And I feel like in that case, you can pinpoint the the
Mhm.
the error in his or her reasoning or
Sure.
awareness of the facts, right? And you could potentially persuade them that they're wrong if they really properly understood the facts and used
Yeah,
reason.
and I think
Right.
transcendental argument, which is what I'm proposing, has the ability to do that with an atheist too, or a materialist, or
Or a
whatever position you want
or
to
a
hold to.
Wiccan or a Druid or anyone like your view is that whatever people believe about the supernatural, the same method would work if they only knew the facts and used reason, they would come to your conclusions?
Yes, ultimately.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Now, it might take some legwork and it might be a little roundabout because what I'm getting at is that there's a difference between kind of arguing about mundane empirical things, which is what the domain of science is, versus how you go about arguing for preconditions of knowledge or worldviews or paradigms as a whole. So it's a different type of argument, and different types of things are proven in different ways. So, for example, how do I know that logic works? Well, that's a meta-logical question. It goes outside of the bounds of the normal questions of, you know, regular logical questions. How do I know that we have knowledge? Right? That's an epistemological question, but it's an epistemological question that raises the bar one level. So it's a meta epistemological question, right? What is knowledge? How do we know that we have knowledge? Can we have knowledge? Right? So when you start to ask those types of questions, it raises the bar and it takes the type of proof out of the domain of the empirical sense data. So we're actually now arguing about a higher level of abstraction than does water boil at 100 degrees? Can I study, flies in the Congo, et cetera?
Yeah, but I think that, and again, just interrupt me or throw me away if you wanna get to the next speaker, I don't wanna hog the mic, but the difference it seems to me is, or I may be struggling to understand your point, is that in science, when you use that method, or what I consider to be that method, although you would say it's the same as faith, but what I think of as science causes convergence, like Galilean rel
No, I think, but you're missing the point about what I'm talking about by raising the bar or asking more fundamental questions about science itself. So, what I'm arguing is not whether your conclusions within the earthworm studies are true or false. I don't doubt that you can come to various consensuses and dispute with the other colleagues in the lab about the earthworm. What I'm saying is that science itself presupposes things that science can't prove. And that means that you're resting on things that you haven't thought about or don't. And I'm not saying you personally, but I'm saying like the people who do
Right.
science typically, for example, have not studied philosophy of science. So what I'm talking about is what you'll, if you take a philosophy of science class, you'll start asking all these kinds of questions, and you'll read a bunch of essays by people who've asked, what is science? How do we do science? What does science presuppose? How is the method of science reliable? How do we know it's reliable? These are all philosophy of science
Yeah, but
questions. And those are very important. Yeah.
the proof is in the pudding, right? Like, those presuppositions must.
No. See, this is why that doesn't work. That's a false argument for justification. So to argue that because something works doesn't tell me that it's justified in doing it, or that doesn't count as epistemic justification, because I can conceivably make anything quote work depending upon what I'm getting trying to get it to do, right? So just because something quote works is missing the point about, well, how do you know that the science itself is true, or that the scientific method is true? Because the method is never under the purview of uh, the microscope or science itself.
Yeah, but, like, nuclear reactors will always work even if they're based on a f
No, you're missing the point. You can't make that claim logically.
I can't claim that nuclear reactors work.
You said always, which is a universal claim. So in logic, that's called a universal quantifier. Anytime you say that, if you're an empirical science-based person, you've shot yourself in the foot because it's an unjustified claim. You can't demonstrate empirically that this event will always in the future operate that way. It's an assumption. And I think it's a good assumption, but it cannot logically be demonstrated. So you see right there, science is resting on logical assumptions that it can't justify.
Yeah, but if you abandon logical assumptions, you end up with religion, right? A proliferation of different beliefs that can't
No,
be
but see,
reconciled.
you're missing. That's precisely my argument. Is that it's not abandoning logic for religion. Revelation is the foundation for logic
But
at
why does it
all.
lead to why
Logic
does
could.
revelation lead to different outcomes for different people in different countries and different historical periods is what I'm
Well,
asking.
that would just be a fallacy. The fact that people have varying religious beliefs doesn't mean that their religion is that has nothing to do with whether
You're
religion's
saying
true
they're
or
doing it
false. That's
wrong.
a fallacy. Well, wouldn't you say the same thing about a person in science who came to false conclusions?
Yeah, I would.
So that has nothing to do with whether their position is true or false.
What I'm saying is, why does revelation lead to different conclusions? And it's a good faith question, like, in terms of, are you saying that they're doing it the wrong way? Or is it the wrong revelation, or did they listen to the wrong
I mean,
God, or
I could ask you the same question as to why the scientific method would lead people to different conclusions. I
because
mean,
the
there's a
evidence
lot of reasons
changes?
for it. Or people
Because
are
we learn
using it
things.
wrong, they're doing bad. There's a lot, or people are not good scientists, or they don't follow the method, or they're paid off, or they're getting grant money and they just want to fudge the
So you're saying
evidence.
people don't follow the
That's fine.
religious or faith/reason method correctly.
I'm saying that should be obvious to you that because there's differentiation in religious claims has nothing to do with which position is true or false. It's a
Do you think
fallacy.
a person can have a genuine, sincere faith that is incorrect?
Yeah, people can sincerely believe wrong things, sure.
Okay, got it. Thank you.